Respect isn't given to people like you, Garrett laughed, cutting me off mid-sentence. The projection screen behind me displayed slide 16 of my presentation, a graph showing our plant's vulnerability to new safety regulations. 28 pairs of eyes shifted uncomfortably in my direction. I gripped the edge of the table. These findings are based on 3 months of data analysis showing theories, he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. Just theories from someone who's never managed more than spreadsheets. Heat crawled up my neck as I watched 8 years of dedicated work dismissed in seconds. The conference room felt suddenly airless. My colleagues stared at their notebooks, unwilling to meet my gaze. The regulatory changes I've outlined will impact our operation costs by at least, Garrett stood, effectively ending my presentation. We need solutions from people who understand our business, not hypothetical problems from someone trying to play at authority. The silence that followed was deafening. Let's move on to production targets, he continued, as if he hadn't just humiliated me in front of the entire leadership team. Something concrete we can actually use. I sat through the remainder of the meeting in a daze, the carefully assembled presentation binder, heavy in my hands. 3 months of research, countless late nights poring over injury reports and upcoming safety legislation, all dismissed because I didn't fit their image of what authority looked like. Too young, too female, too cautious. When the meeting dispersed, I didn't rush out like the others. I methodically gathered my materials while Garrett chatted with our CEO, their laughter echoing against the walls. My supervisor glanced over, catching my eye with a look that said he'd already forgotten our exchange. That afternoon, I cleared my desk. No dramatic resignation, no tearful goodbyes. I simply collected my certification plaques, my industry awards, and the safety protocol handbook I'd written for the company 2 years prior. The handbook they'd published without my name on it. As I walked through the manufacturing floor one last time, I noticed things others didn't see. The outdated safety guards on the new pressing machines, the improper storage of chemical solvents, the lack of proper training protocols for temporary workers. All issues I'd flagged repeatedly. All issues that would soon become very, very expensive mistakes. What my former employers didn't understand was that I hadn't been theorizing. I'd been warning them. The regulatory tsunami wasn't hypothetical, it was inevitable, and they had just sent their life raft walking out the door. Before we continue any further, thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means everything, and it helps these stories reach more people who might need to hear them. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone dismiss your expertise like this. I read every comment and love hearing from you. Now, let's get back to how this all unfolded. My name is Linnea, and until that day, I'd been the senior safety compliance specialist at one of the largest manufacturing plants in the region. I'd joined the company straight out of graduate school with my master's in industrial safety engineering. I was idealistic, ambitious, and convinced that preventing workplace injuries was both morally right and economically smart. For 8 years, I'd fought for improved safety measures, often being the only woman in rooms full of men who'd spent decades in manufacturing. My analyses were always meticulous. My predictions had proven accurate time after time. When I implemented new training protocols in my second year, injury rates dropped by 22%, saving the company millions in workers' compensation. But being right wasn't enough. I didn't play golf with the executives. I didn't laugh at their off-color jokes. I didn't overlook safety concerns to push production targets. And now, Garrett, promoted to operations director 6 months earlier, despite having half my qualifications, had made it crystal clear where I stood. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by industry textbooks and regulatory guidelines. My phone buzzed with messages from confused colleagues asking where I'd gone. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed, Comprehensive Safety Certification System. The next morning, I withdrew my retirement savings, every penny I'd accumulated, over 8 years. It was enough to rent a small office space in a building downtown and cover 6 months of basic living expenses. The space was nothing special, just a room with dingy beige walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed incessantly, and worn carpet that had seen better decades. But it was mine. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by determination and the echo of Garrett's laughter. I already knew what was coming because I'd been tracking the regulatory changes for years. The manufacturing sector was about to face unprecedented scrutiny over worker injury rates, chemical handling, equipment maintenance, and training protocols. By week 3, my office walls were covered in charts, regulatory drafts, and implementation timelines. I slept on a cot in the corner most nights. When the cleaning woman found me there at 4 a.m., huddled under my coat with papers spread across the floor, she brought me a blanket the next night without comment. "You building something big?" she asked, emptying my overflowing trash bin. "Something necessary," I replied. By month 2, I had the framework of a comprehensive safety certification system that would not only meet the coming regulations, but anticipate them. I reached out to Ava, my former classmate, who now worked as a senior government safety inspector. "You're sure about these regulatory changes?" she asked over coffee, reviewing my projections. "Absolutely. The previous administration shelved them, but the new one is fast-tracking implementation. Manufacturing won't know what hit them." Ava studied my certification framework. "This is impressive, Linnea. If companies implemented this now, they'd be ready when the hammer falls," I finished. "Most won't move until they're forced to," she warned. "Some might," I said. "The forward-thinking ones." With Ava's feedback, I refined my methodology. Then I reached out to 3 smaller manufacturers who had progressive leadership. I offered to implement my protocols at cost, asking only that they track the results meticulously. The first was skeptical but desperate after a series of minor accidents had raised their insurance premiums. The second saw the value immediately. The third agreed only after his daughter, who worked in HR, convinced him it was worth trying. Within 3 months, their collective injury rates had dropped by 74%. Workers' compensation claims plummeted. Employee retention improved. Even productivity increased. Turns out, workers perform better when they're not afraid of getting hurt. Word began to spread. Industry publications requested interviews. Trade associations invited me to speak. I hired an assistant just to manage inquiries, then a second one when the first couldn't keep up. I named my company SafeCore Certification. Simple, direct, and impossible to confuse with my former employer. 6 months into my venture, I was reviewing applications from manufacturers seeking certification when my phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Federal regulators announce sweeping new safety requirements for manufacturing sector. The announcement was exactly as I'd predicted: comprehensive, stringent, and with a tight compliance timeline of 90 days. Companies would need to overhaul their safety protocols or face penalties that could reach millions. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly. My email inbox filled faster than I could read them. And then I saw it, a message from a familiar address, Garrett's. "Need to discuss urgent business matter. Please call at earliest convenience." I deleted it without responding. The next day, another message arrived, this time from the CEO, interested in consulting arrangement regarding new safety regulations. Premium rates offered. I smiled as I sent that one to the trash too. By week's end, the financial news reported that my former company's stock had plummeted 43% after analysts downgraded them over compliance concerns. A workplace incident investigation had revealed systemic safety failures. Their largest client was threatening to pull $42 million in contracts without immediate action. That's when the text arrived. "Need to talk. Urgent." I didn't respond to that either, or to the call that followed, or to the increasingly desperate emails that arrived daily. Then, exactly 6 months after I had walked out, I arrived early at my now much larger office. Through the glass partition, I watched as they filed into my waiting room. Garrett, the operations director, Lena, the human resources director, and Xavier, the CEO himself, all looking smaller than I remembered. My assistant, May, approached my desk with a knowing look. "They've been waiting for 40 minutes, she informed me. "The older one keeps checking his watch." "They don't have an appointment," I said, loud enough to carry through the partially open door. "I'm fully booked for 3 weeks. Through the glass, I watched Garrett shift uncomfortably in his seat, tugging at his collar. Lena kept her eyes on her phone, pretending to be busy. Xavier, however, sat unnaturally still, his gaze fixed on the wall, displaying our certification metrics and client testimonials. After another 20 minutes, Xavier approached the reception desk, his authoritative demeanor crumbling slightly as May looked up at him with polite indifference. "We need to speak with Linnea today," he said. "It's a matter of considerable urgency." "Miss Reyes is extremely busy," May replied, glancing at her scheduler. "The earliest opening is 3 weeks from Thursday." "We can't wait that long," Xavier insisted, lowering his voice. "Our company faces significant penalties without immediate certification. We're prepared to pay whatever premium is necessary for expedited service." I let them wait another hour before I finally emerged from my office. The contrast between this moment and our last encounter wasn't lost on me. Then, I'd been standing before them, desperately trying to make them hear me. Now, they were the ones waiting for my attention. When I appeared in the reception area, Garrett stood quickly, too quickly, stumbling slightly as he rose. Lena straightened her blazer. Xavier stepped forward with his hand extended, a practiced smile on his face. I didn't take his hand. "You need something from me now," I stated simply. "Linnea," Xavier began, dropping his hand awkwardly. "We should discuss this privately." I nodded to May, who buzzed open the door to the conference room. I gestured for them to enter, then followed, closing the door behind us. The room held a simple table with 6 chairs, a whiteboard covered in safety protocols, and large windows overlooking the city. "We've prepared an application," Xavier said, sliding a folder toward me. I didn't touch it. "Interesting how quickly circumstances change," I remarked, taking a seat at the head of the table. Xavier cleared his throat. "We recognize your expertise in this area." "Do you?" I interrupted. "6 months ago, you dismissed my theories as hypothetical problems." Garrett shifted in his seat. "That was unfortunate phrasing on my part." "It wasn't phrasing," I replied. "It was belief. You genuinely believed I didn't know what I was talking about." "We were wrong," Lena interjected. Clearly, I finally opened their hastily completed application, scanning pages filled with obvious errors and missing data. "This is incomplete," I said, closing it again. "And what is here shows you still haven't addressed the fundamental issues I identified before leaving." Xavier leaned forward. "That's why we're here. We need your guidance." "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked. "Expedited certification," Xavier answered immediately. "Our largest client has given us 30 days to achieve safety certification, or they'll terminate our contract." "And the incident last month didn't help," Lena added. I raised an eyebrow. "Incident?" They exchanged uncomfortable glances. Garrett reluctantly explained. "A malfunction in the pressing department. 2 workers were injured. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to trigger an investigation." I finished for him. "The very department where I flagged outdated safety guards." "Yes," he admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "What do you want?" Xavier asked directly. "Name your price." I considered him for a moment. This man who had watched me be humiliated and said nothing, who had approved raises for everyone in leadership except me for 2 consecutive years, who had nodded along as Garrett dismissed warnings that could have prevented workers from being hurt. "Nothing you can give me," I replied. Then I slid their application back across the table. "But here's what will happen if you want my certification. You'll replace your entire safety leadership team with qualified individuals I personally approve. You'll implement my protocols fully, not partially. Your company will become the industry case study in transformation." "That's extreme," Xavier protested. "So are the consequences of failing certification," I countered. "And if we refuse?" Garrett asked, his voice hollow. I smiled slightly. "Then best of luck finding another path to certification in the next 30 days. Lena looked between us. "We should discuss this privately," she said to her colleagues. "Take your time," I replied, standing. "I have other clients waiting." I left them in the conference room, returning to my office where May had already prepared for my next meeting. Through the glass, I watched them argue, Xavier's face turning red, Garrett gesturing sharply, Lena trying to mediate. After 20 minutes, May buzzed my intercom. "They're ready to see you again." When I returned, the tension in the room was palpable. Xavier looked defeated, Garrett resentful, and Lena pragmatic. "We agree to your terms," Xavier said flatly. "All of them?" "Yes," he confirmed. "We'll need your recommended candidates for the safety team immediately." I nodded. "I'll send over profiles by tomorrow. The implementation timeline will require immediate action." They signed the preliminary agreements without further protest. As they gathered their things to leave, Garrett lingered behind. "You planned this," he said quietly. "No," I corrected him. "I simply prepared for the inevitable while you ignored it." After they left, May brought in a cup of tea and placed it on my desk. "Congratulations," she said. That must have felt satisfying. I watched through the window as my former bosses crossed the street below, heads bent in conversation. "It's not about satisfaction," I told her. "It's about creating real change." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. There was satisfaction in this moment, in being the one they now had to listen to, in knowing that the expertise they had dismissed was now their only lifeline. Yet it felt hollow somehow. The victory wasn't as sweet as I'd imagined during those long nights working alone in my tiny office. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled a team of safety specialists to overhaul my former company's protocols. I personally interviewed each candidate, ensuring they had both the technical knowledge and the courage to stand firm against production pressures. I visited the plant twice to assess conditions firsthand. The workers recognized me, of course. Many approached to say they were glad to see me back, even temporarily. Some shared stories of near misses that had gone unreported. Others showed me makeshift solutions they'd created to protect themselves when proper safety equipment wasn't provided. On my second visit, I found myself face to face with Mira, a line worker who had been with the company for 20 years. She had tears in her eyes when she gripped my hand. "My nephew was one of the ones hurt in that accident," she told me. "If they'd listened to you, it never would have happened." Her words stayed with me as I completed my assessment. This wasn't just about proving myself right or watching Garrett and Xavier squirm. Real people had been hurt because warnings were ignored. Back at Safecore, my team worked tirelessly to create a customized certification pathway for the plant. The process that normally took 3 months would be compressed into 1 without compromising standards. 3 days into implementation, I received a call from Xavier. "This is going to cost millions," he said without preamble. "Yes," I agreed. "Safety violations would cost you more." "The board is questioning whether we should continue operations at all," he admitted. "The compliance timeline you've set might not be financially viable." I frowned. This wasn't what I wanted. Despite everything, the plant employed hundreds of people who would suffer if it closed. "Send me the financial projections," I instructed. "There may be ways to phase implementation that preserve jobs while improving safety." That night, I stayed at the office until midnight, reviewing their numbers. The situation was worse than Xavier had indicated. Years of cutting corners on safety had created vulnerabilities that couldn't be quickly fixed. If their largest client pulled out, the company might not survive at all. I found myself facing an unexpected dilemma. I could stick to my original plan and watch as the company potentially collapsed under the weight of regulatory compliance, a fitting end for leadership that had dismissed crucial warnings. Or I could find a way to help them navigate the transition, saving jobs but potentially letting Xavier and Garrett off the hook. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my team. "We need to develop an alternative approach," I explained, spreading the financial documents across the conference table. "One that ensures safety while preserving the company's viability." "Why help them?" asked Tomas, my lead safety engineer. "After how they treated you." I looked around at the talented team I'd built, people who believed in creating safer workplaces, not just enforcing regulations. "Because this isn't just about them anymore," I replied. "It's about the hundreds of workers who depend on those jobs. And it's about setting a new standard for the industry." By evening, we had created a phased implementation plan that would begin with the highest risk areas and spread compliance costs over 18 months instead of 3. I had May schedule a meeting with Xavier and his team for the following day. That night, as I drove home, I wondered if I was making a mistake. Was I letting go of my chance for true vindication? Or was I finding a different kind of victory? One that would change the industry rather than just punishing 3 people who had wronged me. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone lit up with a news alert that made my decision suddenly, shockingly clear. The screen of my phone illuminated my car interior as I stared at the headline. "Manufacturing giant concealed previous safety violations. Senior executive sold shares before announcement." The article detailed how Xavier had sold significant company stock just days before the new safety regulations were announced. An internal whistleblower had revealed documents showing leadership had buried 3 previous safety incidents, including one that had resulted in a worker's permanent disability. My hands shook as I scrolled through the article. Names jumped out at me, workers I had known, incidents I had suspected but could never prove. According to the whistleblower, the company had paid settlements with strict confidentiality clauses, effectively silencing injured workers. The final paragraph mentioned a Justice Department investigation into potential securities fraud related to the timing of Xavier's stock sales. I sat in my darkened car for a long time, processing this information. My compassionate plan to help them transition suddenly felt naive. They hadn't just ignored safety recommendations, they had actively concealed evidence of their dangers. I called May despite the late hour. "Cancel tomorrow's meeting," I instructed, "and call our legal team first thing in the morning." The next day, I arrived at Safecore earlier than usual. My legal advisor, Daria, was already waiting. "I've reviewed the news," she said. "This changes everything about your certification process." "I know," I agreed. "I can't certify a company that willfully concealed safety violations." "There's more," Daria added, sliding a folder across my desk. "Another former employee reached out to me this morning after seeing the news. He has documentation showing Garrett specifically ordered the removal of your safety recommendations from final reports to the board." I opened the folder to find printouts of emails and meeting minutes with certain sections highlighted. There, in Garrett's own words, "Remove Linnea's excessive safety projections. We need to keep costs down this quarter." End quote. The evidence was damning. Not only had they dismissed my warnings publicly, but they had also actively buried them in their reporting structure. "What's your plan?" Daria asked. I closed the folder slowly. "To do exactly what I've always done, prioritize safety. But now, with complete transparency, within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from Xavier and Garrett. I ignored them all, instructing May to tell them I was unavailable until further notice. Instead, I spent the day working with my team to create a comprehensive industry report documenting safety compliance issues across the manufacturing sector. We highlighted best practices, successful implementations, and the financial benefits of proactive safety measures. In the report's introduction, I wrote, "This analysis is dedicated to every worker who has been injured due to preventable safety violations, and to those who spoke up only to be silenced." We published the report online that evening, making it freely available to every manufacturer, safety officer, and regulatory body in the country. Within hours, it had been downloaded thousands of times. The following morning, I arrived at my office to find Garrett waiting in the reception area. His usual polished appearance had deteriorated, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "You need to help us," he said, stepping forward as I entered. "The Department of Labor has suspended our operations pending investigation. We have 3 days to submit a remediation plan, or they'll shut us down permanently." "That sounds like a company problem," I replied, continuing toward my office. "Linnea, please," he called after me, desperation evident in his voice. 800 people will lose their jobs, people who had nothing to do with leadership decisions. I stopped, turning back to face him. "I'm not interested in helping leadership escape consequences for willful negligence." "I know," he said quietly. "Neither am I, anymore." Something in his tone made me pause. "The board called an emergency meeting last night," he continued. "Xavier has been placed on administrative leave pending the Justice Department investigation. Lena has resigned." "And you?" I asked. "I've been directed to cooperate fully with investigators," he admitted. "My position is uncertain." "As it should be," I replied. "The board wants to meet with you," he said. "Not about certification, about taking over safety operations completely. They're prepared to create a new executive position with direct board reporting." I studied his face, searching for deception. "And they sent you to tell me this?" "No," he said. "They sent their legal counsel. I came on my own because I owe you the truth. I undermined your work because I was threatened by it. I buried your recommendations because they would have cost us short-term profits and reflected poorly on my department. Workers got hurt because of my decisions." His admission hung in the air between us. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because I've spent 6 months watching you build something meaningful while I helped destroy what we had," he replied. "And because regardless of what happens to me, those workers deserve better." I considered him for a long moment. "I'll meet with the board, but not about taking a position. If they want my help, they'll need to agree to my terms." 2 days later, I sat across from the board of directors in their downtown office. The atmosphere was tense, the long table surrounded by concerned faces. "We appreciate you meeting with us, Miss Reyes," began Renata, the board chair. "We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. created by choices made repeatedly over years, I noted. Yes, she acknowledged. Choices we now recognize were disastrous. That's why we're prepared to offer you complete control over safety operations, with executive status and board representation. I'm not interested in joining your company, I replied, but I am interested in protecting workers. I opened my laptop and projected a document onto the screen at the end of the room. This is my proposal. Safecorp will establish an independent safety monitoring office within your facilities. We will have unfettered access to all operations, data, and personnel. Our reports will be submitted simultaneously to management and to worker representatives. Worker representatives? Asked one board member. Yes, I confirmed. A safety committee elected by workers themselves, with protected status to prevent retaliation. That's highly unusual, Renata noted. So is having your operations suspended by the Department of Labor, I countered. They exchanged glances. What about costs? Asked another board member. My team has prepared a financial analysis showing the implementation costs against projected savings from reduced injuries, lower insurance premiums, and avoided regulatory penalties, I explained, advancing to the next slide. The return on investment becomes positive by Q3. And the current leadership team? That's your decision, I said. But my recommendation is transparent accountability. Those who concealed violations should face appropriate consequences. Those who implemented unsafe practices should be removed from decision-making positions. Including Garrett? Renata asked. I paused. I believe in second chances, when they're earned through actions, not promises. If he's willing to publicly acknowledge his role and work under supervision to make amends, that's for you to decide. After 3 hours of negotiation, they agreed to my terms. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The regulatory pressure, public scrutiny, and potential legal liability had backed them into a corner that only my expertise could help them escape. As I left the meeting, Renata walked me to the elevator. You could have destroyed this company, she said quietly. Why didn't you? Because destruction is easy, I replied. Transformation is harder, but more valuable. The following weeks were intense. My team worked alongside plant employees to implement proper safety protocols. We installed monitoring systems, established reporting mechanisms, and trained workers on their rights and responsibilities. The safety committee members were elected and began meeting weekly. True to my word, I required the company to publish a full accounting of past safety violations and the steps being taken to remedy them. They established a fund to provide additional compensation to previously injured workers, regardless of prior settlements. 3 months into implementation, the Department of Labor lifted their suspension order. The plant resumed full operations with new safety protocols in place. Injury rates plummeted, worker morale improved. Production actually increased as processes became more efficient. Xavier ultimately resigned before being terminated, facing separate legal issues regarding his stock sales. Lena moved to another industry entirely. Garrett, surprisingly, accepted a role working under the new safety director, a position several levels below his previous one, but one where he could directly contribute to implementing the changes he had once resisted. On the day operations fully resumed, I walked through the manufacturing floor one last time. Workers nodded respectfully as I passed. Some stopped to thank me. Mira, whose nephew had been injured, gave me a hug. You did what nobody else could, she said. You made them listen. Near the main entrance, a new plaque had been installed. Safety first, production second. No exceptions. Beneath it hung a framed copy of my original safety analysis, the one that had been dismissed 6 months earlier. As I turned to leave, I saw Garrett supervising the installation of new machine guards. He noticed me watching and crossed the floor to where I stood. I always knew you were good, he said. I just never understood how good until you left. It wasn't about being good, I told him. It was about being right when it mattered. He nodded. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for what I said that day, but for every time I didn't listen when I should have. Make it count now, I replied, gesturing to the workers around us. They're the ones who always paid the price. 6 months later, Safecorp had become the gold standard for industrial safety certification. Our client list included most major manufacturers in the region. The methods I'd developed became case studies in graduate programs. Regulatory bodies consulted with us on implementation strategies. My former company became our most visible success story. Not because I wanted to help them specifically, but because their transformation demonstrated what was possible when safety became a genuine priority rather than a box to check. The real vindication came not from seeing my former bosses humbled, but from seeing my vision implemented on a scale I hadn't imagined possible. Workers across hundreds of facilities were safer because I had refused to stay silent, refused to give up when dismissed, and refused to make my revenge about personal gratification rather than systemic change. Respect, as it turns out, isn't given or commanded. It's earned through vision, preparation, and the courage to walk away when undervalued. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so essential that those who dismissed you must acknowledge your worth to survive. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Stories like mine happen every day in workplaces around the world. Talented people silenced, warnings ignored, expertise dismissed until it's too late. If you're facing similar struggles, remember that your knowledge has value, even when others fail to recognize it. Sometimes the best response to dismissal isn't fighting harder for recognition, but building something new that makes your value impossible to ignore. Please share this story if it resonated with you. Your comments help me know which stories matter most, and subscribing ensures you won't miss the next one. Until next time, remember that the most powerful asset you have isn't your position. It's your expertise and the courage to stand by it, even when standing alone.